Heat waves, inflation spikes, and GDP meltdowns, oh my. Folks, if you thought the economy was a circus before, grab your popcorn, because the clowns in charge are turning up the heat, literally and figuratively. Today, we're diving headfirst into the ECB's latest climate crusade, the Fed's shameless sidestepping, and how government mismanagement is setting us up for an economic inferno. Buckle up, boss economics fam, this one's gonna burn. Hello, my financially frustrated friends. Welcome back to Boss Economics World, the only place where we rip the band-aid off economic nonsense and expose the government's A-plus talent for turning solvable problems into full-blown disasters. I'm your host, the guy who's been yelling into the void about inflation, GDP, and government incompetence since before it was cool. And today, oh boy, do we have a sizzling hot topic, literally. We're talking heat waves, climate change, and how the suits in charge are fumbling the ball so hard, we're all gonna need SPF 50 just to survive the economic fallout. So, let's set the stage. It's July 5, 2025, and Europe is sweating through yet another heatwave, surprise, surprise, while the European Central Bank is out here trying to convince us they've got this under control. ECB Executive Board member Frank Elderson, bless his heart, is sounding the alarm louder than a fire truck in a library. He's pointing to the scorching summer of 2022, remember that one, folks, when food price inflation spiked by up to 0.9 percentage points and Germany's GDP took a measurable hit. And now, with climate change turning Europe into a convection oven, the ECB is finally waking up to the fact that maybe, just maybe, ignoring Mother Nature isn't the best monetary policy. But wait, there's more. While the ECB is at least trying to adapt, keyword, trying, the Federal Reserve across the pond is basically sticking its fingers in its ears and singing, la la la, climate change isn't our problem. Fed Chair Jerome Powell has made it crystal clear, we will not be climate policymakers, he says, as if financial stability and environmental disasters aren't two sides of the same coin. And don't even get me started on the corporate lobbying, like Germany's Stiftung Familienunternehmen, out here crying that climate policies might infringe on their sacred right to profit while the planet chokes. Folks, this is the kind of economic mismanagement that makes you wonder if the people in charge even know how to read a thermometer, let alone a balance sheet. So, grab your iced coffee, or your pitchfork, depending on how mad this makes you, and let's break down this hot mess from point to surface, boss economics style. We're gonna analyze the economic issues behind this clown show, roast the government's failures, and back it all up with the latest, juiciest data to prove just how deep the incompetence runs. Ready? Let's go. First things first, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or should I say, the heatwave in the economy. Climate change isn't just about hugging trees or saving polar bears, it's about cold, hard cash. Extreme weather events, like the heatwaves frying Europe, are blasting holes in key economic indicators faster than you can say, quantitative easing. Elderson's right to point to 2022 as a wake-up call, food price inflation jumped by up to 0.9 percentage points, and Germany's GDP took a hit. But let's not kid ourselves, that was just a preview. Fast forward to 2025, and the data is screaming louder than ever. According to the European Environment Agency's latest report, heatwaves in 2024 alone cost the EU economy €50 billion in agricultural losses, infrastructure damage, and productivity declines. And guess what? The ECB's own projections show that if global temperatures rise by 3 degrees Celsius, very likely at our current pace, annual inflation in the Eurozone could increase by up to 1.2 percentage points by 2035, driven largely by food and energy price shocks. Meanwhile, GDP growth could shrink by 0.5% annually, wiping out trillions in economic output over the next decade. Folks, this isn't climate science fiction, this is economic reality. But here's where the government fumbles the ball, big time. Instead of proactively addressing these risks, they're either playing catch-up or pretending the problem doesn't exist. The ECB is at least trying to pivot, announcing this week that it's now factoring in nature degradation alongside climate change in its monetary policy framework. Elderson calls it an important addition, and sure, it's a step in the right direction. But let's be real, this should have happened years ago. The ECB's been dragging its feet while the planet, and the economy, burns. And don't even get me started on the federal Powells out here saying climate change is a very, very narrow part of their mandate, as if financial stability doesn't depend on a stable environment. Newsflash, Jerome, when crops fail, prices spike, and supply chains collapse, that's not narrow, that's a full-blown economic crisis. Now, let's zoom in on inflation, because this is where the rubber meets the road, or should I say, the heatwave meets the grocery store. Extreme weather doesn't just make you sweat, it makes your wallet cry. Droughts, floods, and heatwaves are decimating crop yields, driving up food prices, and sending inflation into overdrive. And guess who's left holding the bag? You, me, and every other regular Joe trying to afford a loaf of bread. The data backs this up in spades. According to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization's Food Price Index, global food prices have risen by 15% since 2022, with heatwave-induced crop failures in Europe, India, and the US being major culprits. In the Eurozone, food inflation hit 8.3% year-on-year in May 2025, per Eurostat, and energy prices aren't far behind, with heatwaves straining power grids and spiking electricity costs. The ECB's own research shows that climate-related shocks could add up to 0.7 percentage points to core inflation annually by 2030 if left unchecked. And yet, what's the ECB doing? Tinkering with interest rates and slapping a climate-friendly label on their asset purchases, as if that's gonna cool down the planet, or the economy. Meanwhile, the Fed is out here pretending climate-driven inflation is just a blip on the radar. Powell's crew has kept interest rates stubbornly high, 5.5% as of June 2025, claiming it's all about taming inflation. But here's the kicker, a recent IMF study found that 30% of current US inflation is driven by supply-side shocks, including climate-related disruptions, not demand. So, while the Fed's busy hiking rates and choking Main Street, the real problem, climate-driven supply chain chaos, is getting worse. Folks, this isn't economics, this is economic malpractice. Now, let's talk about the ECB's shiny new buzzword, nature degradation. Elderson's right to highlight this. Nature risk isn't just about CO2 emissions, it's about fish stocks, timber, soil health, water scarcity, and more. But here's the problem, governments and central banks have been treating nature like an all-you-can-eat buffet, and now the bill's coming due. Take water scarcity, for example. A 2025 World Bank report found that water shortages, exacerbated by climate change, could slash GDP growth in water-stressed regions by up to 6% by 2050. In Europe, the European Commission estimates that droughts in 2024 alone cost €20 billion in economic damages, with southern countries like Spain and Italy hit hardest. And don't forget biodiversity loss. According to the World Economic Forum's 2025 Global Risks Report, over half of global GDP depends on nature, yet ecosystems are collapsing faster than a house of cards in a windstorm. So, what's the ECB doing about it? Well, they're researching and outreaching, which is central banker code for, we'll get to it eventually. Meanwhile, the Fed's approach is even worse. Powell's crew has actively worked to water down global banking standards, like those set by the Basel Committee, to avoid holding banks accountable for climate and nature risks. And in Germany, corporate lobbyists are out here whining that climate policies might hurt their bottom line. Boo freaking who, guys, maybe if you'd invested in sustainable practices instead of short-term profits, we wouldn't be in this mess. Here's the bottom line, folks. Climate change and nature degradation are economic train wrecks waiting to happen, and the government's mismanagement is the conductor asleep at the wheel. The ECB's late to the party climate pivot is better than nothing, but it's nowhere near enough. The Fed's head in the sand approach is straight up reckless. And corporate lobbying? That's just the cherry on top of this incompetent sundae. Let's talk recession risk. The OECD's latest economic outlook warns that climate-related shocks could tip the global economy into recession by 2027 if governments and central banks don't act decisively. In the US, the National Bureau of Economic Research estimates that unmitigated climate risks could shave 2% off GDP growth annually by 2030, pushing unemployment up by 1.5 million jobs. And in Europe, the ECB's own stress tests show that banks are woefully unprepared for climate-driven credit risks, with potential losses of €1 trillion by 2035 if nature degradation isn't addressed. So, what's the solution? Well, for starters, central banks need to stop treating climate change like a side hustle and start treating it like the existential economic threat it is. The ECB should be stress testing banks for nature risks yesterday, not eventually. The Fed needs to wake up and smell the wildfires, incorporating climate risks into its financial stability mandate before it's too late. And governments? They need to stop caving to corporate lobbyists and start investing in green infrastructure, sustainable agriculture, and renewable energy, stat. According to Bloomberg NEF, every $1 invested in climate adaptation yields $7 in economic benefits. Sounds like a no-brainer, right? Too bad our leaders' brains seem to be on permanent vacation. Alright, folks, let's wrap this up with the boss economics verdict. Climate change and nature degradation aren't just environmental problems, they're economic powder kegs, and the governments in charge are fumbling the matches. The ECB's trying, but it's too little, too late. The Fed's in denial, and corporate lobbyists are out here playing violin while the economy burns. The result? Inflation soaring, GDP's tanking, and regular people like you and me are left holding the bag. So, what can you do? Stay informed, stay loud, and hold these clowns accountable. And hey, maybe invest in some solar panels, or a bunker, depending on how pessimistic you're feeling. Until next time, this is Boss Economics World, where we expose the economic nonsense so you don't have to. Hit that like button, smash subscribe, and let's keep fighting the good fight. See you in the comments, Boss Economics fam. stay cool, stay sharp, and stay mad.